Hi everyone, this is really weird. I don't know if you can hear me, just notice it. Cool, that's awesome. The feedback's not great, but anyway. So thank you so much for coming in. Essentially, I wanted to briefly talk to you through the journey of the last 5 years across the world and what we've experienced as far as remote goes. Um, as a brief introductory, remote handles global employment. We're about 1,000 people across the world. We have no single office. Everyone is literally across the globe in many different countries, many different cities, and I've never met most of the team, to be honest, about 50 people. So across the 5 years, remote started in January 2019, by the way. Just two people out of Portugal, of all countries. And the next slide is just a beautiful generic slide, and I have nothing more to add to it. But in 2019, the world was getting ready to face something new, a pandemic. So with that came, a lot of panic, companies squandering to try to find, how to work, how to build their teams, how to execute their, strategy, and all this changed massively, right? Most companies were used to get into an office, day by day, do the typical water cooler conversation, and change massively. The processes were not the same. The way you handle things are not the same. 1 year later, after the pandemic, we faced a global war, right? It started with Ukraine, started to expand, and we had millions of people facing displacement and shortage of work, shortage of housing, living, basic care, basic need. And these people had to move their whole lives, families, across the world. Many relocated to completely different countries, across the world to different geographies, many of which they don't really speak the language. Another year later, and I'm sorry for the grim picture that I'm painting, but I'll recap in a bit. We see banks starting to fall left and right, starting with the US, and then slowly spreading out to all the entangled countries that are somehow related to the beginning of a very big downturn. And this downturn affects a lot of companies, be it local or global, which forces us to look into financial planning, how we forecast, how we hire, how we spend our money, how we spend our cash, and how we communicate with the teams based on this. And now we are being told to get ready for a recession by the end of the year, beginning of the next. And it's going to be a different one because apparently, as far as the experts say, with a lot of air quotes in it, on the experts, it's going to be a sticky one, meaning unlike the previous recessions that come and go, this will be a stickier one. Like it will be a long while until we sort of get rid of it or recover the state of the economy. And why does this matter? And why am I being all, doom and gloom about this? Let's go back again to 2019. With the pandemic, companies realized that most processes being employed in an office were not efficient. Most companies realized that you can actually do the same work across any point in space, across the Earth at least, so far. And what that means is there's so many opportunities to talk about hiring in different countries, embracing diversity, inclusion, and creating a culture that is truly distributed. Companies didn't have a choice. Most of us were pushed into it. Some wanted to go back to an office, and so to each their own, it's fine. But many did not want to go back to an office. It's just not a business case. It's productivity-wise, we see over 60% of the companies stating that their productivity went up in a matter of a few months. Of course, it's a special time where we were all fearing for our lives. It's the end of the world as we know it, and as far as news were concerned, for sure. But we did learn a lot, from processes to hiring, to learning to communicate with colleagues, and also even the sheer fabric that composes the typical headcount of a company, how, the type of people that you hire, and what are the skills as well. So this evolved, remote work evolved from this sort of fringe benefit to which only digital nomads were entitled to take the proverbial picture at the beach with the feet up and the sea in front of it and a margarita or something and say, digital nomad life. And it became a truth and a de facto to so many people across the world. And it became possible. And so people started to realize that there's a lot more to it than just, funny pictures. And of course then we got the cat pictures, cats and dogs on the screen and all that. But it evolved. And so remote work became this new way to do work. And to many, remote was the first step into the future of work, essentially why we're here today. Secondly, we start to talk about a war that started profusely in Ukraine. How is this related? A lot of people, and to many that are not directly impacted, it's hard to picture, but it's millions of people moving out, sometimes by foot. And now the interesting part of it is that many actually did not end up losing their job because they were working for remote companies or distributed companies. And they were able to, across the world, no matter where they landed, to rebuild their lives, working from wherever they are, not necessarily bound to the country or to the companies available nearby. And so it starts to compound into this global picture of, okay, so something is different. And now the third cataclysmic scenario, which is, banks falling left and right, is a massive, great lesson from there. Is that if you hold your entire asset pool in one sitting, in one place, with massive risk, right? And so it also teaches companies and people that distribution is not just about teams. It's about how you effectively locate your assets as a whole, as a business, as a community too. And so holding an office within a single space with everyone in it holds, if you want to talk about assets, everything in sort of a hostage situation. Because if there's a local event, if laws change, your whole business is tied to one specific geolocation. And so you're going to miss out on diversification, on an inclusive, more inclusive environment, on more productivity, and even more insights from the rest of the world. And then ultimately, we're faced with the beginning of a recession, which also forces companies across the world to understand what does a good financial plan look like. And it looks like hiring, matching talent and opportunity across the world, and making sure that you're deploying your investment either as a person to choose the best company you could possibly work for, rather than having to leave your job, your country, your city, and actually work from company of your dreams, have the career of your dreams without having to leave. We built remote out of Portugal, and I live in this tiny, very tiny village outside of Lisbon. So it's not like I'm in a big capital either. On top of which, companies understand, I can really build a more sustainable financial plan. Why? Because I don't have to hire 50, people within San Francisco or New York, as great as these cities are, or even London. I can distribute it across the world and get the best talent I can possibly find without having to break bank. And you're managing to create this egalitarian scenario across the world where you distribute wealth and you compound into a different setting, a setting where people, instead of living to work, actually work to live, where you balance your personal stuff with the stuff that happens behind your computer or within your computer, or across Zoom or across Google Meets, or across a colleague in a co-working space. And this has been compounding and showing again and again that the future of work is unraveling in front of us into a scenario where people are at the center of it. And again, we can fundamentally work to live. And that will turn into us following our passions, the things that we care about. Maybe you don't really care about working for a big business. Maybe what you like is to do working. But if you're able to ship your woodwork from, backwater place where you live across the world and build a good website out of it and build your life from it, then it's all for the better. In a way that, we start to discuss universal income across the world. And for those not aware of what it is, it's sort of a minimum wage out of which you may decide not to do the work that you do today, but you're still guaranteed a good living. Because what matters is the value that we bring to society and what society brings to us. And so we're learning in a very fast pace across the last 5 years, pushed by many different events and situations, that the way forward is a distributed global environment with a lot of diversity and more inclusivity as well. That's all I have to say to you today. If you have any questions, thoughts, rants, feel free to grab the mic or grab me outside of this.
Olá, Marcelo.
Wait, I think I need this. Going to be very professional. Oh, wow.
Olá, Marcelo. I'm Sarah, and I wanted to get your views on currently, indeed, startups continue to hire remotely and they have distributed teams, but we are seeing that the big corps, and I work for Amazon Web Services, they are making us coming back to the offices. Why do you think that this is happening, and what do you think are the downturns of this choice?
Well, the downturn is mostly on their end, to be honest. What do we see? Well, this is mostly an investment decision. We have to take into context the financial plans as far as big as they are. They also include assets such as buildings, such as benefits that they provide to people, the processes around all that you do on a day-to-day basis, especially in an office. The way you come into work, you bump into someone, you discuss something, and eventually you set up a meeting. You have a meeting room in which everyone goes to have that specific type of meeting, so on and so forth. And this compounds not only on the balance sheets, but also as far as the processes go. If you have a problem, you either email HR or go to the second floor and talk to someone. These really big companies are so all of a sudden forced to face the fact that, one, they're going to have to write off dozens of millions of investment in spaces. Second, that they have to redo the whole core of their business, from processes, from productivity standards, performances reviews, human capital allocation, and it requires even more investment. And so in face of massive change, you have two options. Either you stall, it's like a fight or fight movement. Many companies are deciding to, fight, meaning, I'm not going to do anything. You're just going to come into the office, and I'm going to run away from the underlying problem that it poses. And so they rather cycle through the people than cycle through what they consider is the core tenets of the business, meaning an office, a culture of the office, which are not the same at all. But for very big businesses, that's what they believe in. That is the core. And it's also, to be honest, a very risky movement to all of a sudden say, we're going to scrape all this and start anew. Right? It's risky. It's fairly doable. We see big companies doing it across the world, but it's a leadership decision. And often in those companies, leadership is not as willing to embrace these changes than the new ones. And on the flip side, what you're saying, your second part is, how is this going to change or influence? Well, it's going to create a lot of opportunities for those that really like the office, but those that prefer life or prefer, to be somewhere else, focus on their career, on themselves. It's also creating a lot of opportunities for these people. So the market is recycling itself. I think it'll be very unforgiving for companies without the economical power to entice people to come into an office from a salary perspective, benefits perspective. It's going to be very unfair because they will not be able to compete with the global salaries that are being employed across the world.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm actually working for a company that's a remote first, and we do have team members and contractors from all over the world. But one of the pain points that I can see right now is that there are some team members that are not really fully engaged with us. So sometimes they're just like working for the sake of completing a task.
Yeah.
So how do you think like remote company or remote team members can make every team member engaged and motivated to working towards the bigger goal instead of just working to complete a task?
Absolutely. Every single company faces this. In an office, we tend to rule it out because, it's just part of being there. Now it tends more observable in a remote setting because of that. And it's very positive as well. Now, two things that I want to say to that. One is clear expectations and goals setting from the company, meaning higher bars, high thresholds, expecting, but it can't be said. It has to be written down because the async part is more important, meaning, when you're talking to someone on Zoom, say, we got to do this. They have different backgrounds. People have different cultures. They're like, okay, we have to do this, sure. And then you go about your life and you don't bump into people. So you're not continuing to get that feeling of, let's go. So you have to set the expectation very clearly, very well defined, very unambiguous at all, entirely. And the second side is intensity. Leadership has to define the tone through which the company dances. And so you have to keep beating the drums because people in any company, to be honest, they will, the intensity, the feeling, the engagement will fade out if not rekindled. And it has to be a continuous work. It still is for us at 1,000 people. And we have tremendously great, professionals working with us, but it's just normal. If I go away on my own, I lose sight, I lose the context, that feeling, and it's about leadership to keep setting the tone as well. And the very last thing is, culture is not an office. So culture is what leadership decides that culture is within the company.